Yeah, before I jump into this, we're going to be talking about crucifixion, and I'll focus a bit on it today. Um, but I want to put something out there before I do, and I want to say I believe that the timing of Jesus' coming had as much to do with what he would do during his life as how he would die. I believe he came at a time where he could be where he would face a death that was worthy of taking our place for it. And I'll get into the details in a minute. Um, but we call today Good Friday. Yeah, in German Karfreitag. We call it good because it's good for us. Yeah, because we are saved. But nobody thought this for the longest time. Like the people at the time, of course, they didn't think it was good. But even Christians didn't call this Good Friday for a long time. Yeah, because crucifixion was seen differently back then. Yeah. And I'm going to now read the verse from Matthew. I think this is one of the more descriptive Gospels on Jesus' crucifixion. I'm going to start in verse 27 in Matthew 27. It says, "Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus." So this is when he's been already declared, he's faced his sentence, and now they're taking him to face the crucifixion. Then the soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. It says set. They didn't set it, they had to pound it on there, so it'd stay. They put a staff in his right hand, and then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. So the cross was too heavy for Jesus, so they had somebody else carry it for him. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left, and those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days? Save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults at him. From noon until there, in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Lema sabachthani," I don't know how to pronounce it, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, He's calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. So this is how Matthew describes it. He left out actually quite a bit. The gory stuff is not in there. But, we kind of see, I think I grew up at least seeing crucifixion and maybe kind of more of a, not positive, but kind of a noble light. Like I pictured, all these medieval paintings of Jesus like some ripped, young guy with a nice beard, and he's on the cross, and he looks like some sort of action hero up there, right? And he's always white. I don't know why he's always white in these pictures. But this is the image I think I had as throughout my childhood. And it's kind of this watered down image. And we see it now today a little bit different. We know what it resulted in, but at the time, it was not this positive. Crucifixion was actually really, really brutal, and the state that Jesus was actually in. If any of you have seen The Passion of Christ, that movie from Mel Gibson, I saw it when I was, I think, a teenager when it came out in the cinema, and it was really the first time that kind of opened my eyes to actually how brutal this whole process was. And I don't know, we always had this other picture of it, and then when we saw that, I think I saw it with some family and a couple cousins or some friends, and we were all just crying our eyes out when we saw it because it was so powerful. When you see what people actually did to each other, And Christians, they did not see this as a positive thing. Yeah, I mean, they were actually ashamed. They didn't, for the first few hundred years, they didn't really talk about the crucifixion. Yeah, because your king, your God being hung up on a cross, and it wasn't just the pain, the suffering, it was also the insults. Yeah, that they were really, he was really, really humiliated. Yeah, that was the whole point of crucifixion as well. And they didn't talk about it. Yeah, it wasn't until Constantine, I think it was 400 AD, he had a vision, he had his dream, and then he then had a great victory afterward, and it was a vision of the crucifixion and the cross. And after that, it was seen differently. So he then abolished it in Rome, in the Roman Empire, and also there was a different image of crucifixion, but until then, they were actually quite ashamed of it because it was something that people were actually ashamed at if it would happen to somebody you knew. So, yeah, it was a different thing. And I'm not going to get too into details on crucifixion today. Yeah, I mean, there's some young ones here. There's some people who maybe a little faint of the heart. But, you know, I heard a couple of podcasts about it. And one thing I want to mention is it was actually a historical fact outside of the Bible that Jesus was crucified. Yeah, there's no doubt. Yeah, other things about Jesus, okay, that people may contest, but there's actually no doubt. There's more than one reference outside the Bible that mentions it. So this happened. And crucifixion was really something, and a really typical thing at the day for people that were accused of things that Jesus was accused of. So this definitely happened. And I mean, I was researching this. I heard a couple podcasts, and you just see the brutality of it. Yeah, there were things about crucifixion. Yeah, so the Romans didn't invent it. It was around before them. They say the earliest records of it was about 600 BC. It got brought over to Rome by Alexander the Great. He brought it to Greece and then the Eastern Mediterranean. And then it somehow made it over to the Romans via the Phoenicians, and they started doing it in about 300 BC, and then they did it all the way up to about 400 AD. So they had it for 600 years, and they say they didn't invent it, but the Romans perfected it. Yeah. So the goal was to deter, to put people up there, to humiliate them, to make them suffer as much as possible, to deter other people from doing it. That was the whole goal of this thing, and that was really the difference between crucifixion and other forms of punishment, was this humiliation. So they mention it here in Matthew, you know, the way they took Jesus around and they paraded him around the streets, but actually they're hanging up on a cross as well so that people could see it. And the PG-13 version is, okay, he's on the cross and you see him with a loincloth, but that wasn't the case. He was naked, yeah? His clothes were gone. He was probably mutilated, actually, in his private area. Yeah, and they did other stuff there. There were things that were going on, like, I won't mention what crows were how crows got involved in this. All I say is it had something to do with the eyes. Yeah, they would offer you, you know, you're up there on this cross, you're struggling to breathe. You're thirsty, you're hungry. The worst thing is probably the thirst, and then they offer you sour wine. That's why they did it, yeah, because these people are dying of thirst. And then Jesus himself, you know, you basically die, hopefully quickly, by when you just can't breathe anymore. But that's also, you would see sometimes they would break somebody's legs while they're on the cross. That was actually a sign that was actually for mercy, because it would end their suffering. They would then die fairly quickly after that. So very, very brutal, yeah, very brutal thing. And it was so brutal that the Romans were actually kind of ashamed of it. So even though the Romans, who love this type of gore, you know, they built these huge colosseums for gladiator fights to watch people get, you know, killed by animals, they were actually also somewhat ashamed and actually embarrassed a bit by crucifixion. And they detested it, yeah, and it was actually not, a Roman citizen could not be crucified. So Jews could be crucified, slaves, servants, but not Roman citizens. If you're a Roman citizen, you could not be crucified because it was such a horrible death. So this is what Jesus went through. This is what a lot of people went through. You see that period, 600 BC at least, till then. But it actually didn't stop. Once Constantine banned it in Rome, it actually continued. So in the research I did, I actually learned that in the Arab world, they still kept doing crucifixions for a long time. It went all the way up to Japan. Even in Japan, they were doing them. They were actually crucifying a Christian priest that came over. So it's a long history of this form of torture, and it was done because it was very effective. It was a very effective way, and you would actually make yourself a name, so get some notoriety as a soldier if you could come up with new and more horrible ways that people could suffer and be humiliated during this process. So I don't want to shock you too much, but I think if you think about crucifixion, I hope you're appalled. I hope it shocks you. And if it doesn't, I think you should research it a little bit to see really what Jesus went through. Because it was not sugar-coated at all. It was the most horrible thing. And if you were one of his followers at the time and you saw that live, I mean, I've seen it in a film. If you saw that live, if you were there in person seeing what was going on, not to mention, this is your Savior, how you put all your hope in and you're seeing what's being done to him. If this was your son, if you were Mary, really, really horrible. Yeah. And the thing that, yeah. And for me, it's just it's like a symbol of this is the lowest that humanity can go. Yeah, can we get lower than this, doing this to each other, not just executing somebody, not just causing them pain, but also trying to humiliate them, also trying to cause them shame, stringing them up and showing that. I mean, I know that the goal is to kind of deter other people, but I think you didn't have to do all this to deter people. They would know, you're going to get punished for claiming false things or whatever. It's the lowest we could go. And I think this is why it had to be crucifixion for Jesus. It had to be a death that you're not just suffering, your blood doesn't just flow, but you also had to feel the shame and the disgrace. You had to be a victim of the worst that we do to each other. Yeah. And I think it also was really important that Jesus showed us just how far he would go for us. Yeah, if Jesus died a quick, painful death, we'd say, yeah, okay. But he went on this willingly. Yeah, he willingly put himself through this, knowing, this sacrifice. And it just shows how much he loved us, how much he would do for us. And he's not just sitting on high, he's down here bleeding and suffering with us, yeah? And I think it's also to show that even after a fate like this, when you can still get redemption, that you can still rise 3 days later on Easter Sunday, yeah? So all these things, yeah? And this is why I think it is important that it was crucifixion. This is how Jesus went, yeah? And that's, I just mentioned that. It's one thing that always gets me, like, Jesus knew this was coming. I mean, I don't know when. The Bible doesn't mention when he actually knew this is how he was going to die. I don't know, maybe he knew from the very beginning. Maybe it was revealed later. I'm not quite sure. I just kind of imagined him having this conversation with God in one of his quiet times, like, okay, God, so I know I'm going to go fairly soon or in a few years. How's it going to be? And he's kind of like, God, am I going to have like some glorious gladiator death, like, I don't know, Russell Crowe in The Gladiator? Am I going to have some action hero thing? Am I going to die in the lion pit? Something horrible, but also kind of, I don't know, heroic or something. And then I can imagine, like, he hears, what's that, God? Crucifixion? Yeah, he hears that. I could just imagine the terror he would feel right away. Because he's, as a young boy, as a young man, he would have seen this. He would have at least heard all about it, if not have witnessed also a few crucifixions in his day. And I sometimes wonder if I knew that was my fate, like if I knew how I was going to die, if it was something peaceful, I don't know, I'm going to die in my sleep one day, or I'm going to die in a snowboarding accident or something, and it's going to be quick and painless or something like that, I think knowing that would bring me peace. But I don't think I would want to know if it was going to be crucifixion. If I knew that this was going to happen to me, if I knew that suffering, yeah, I don't think I'd want to know. And I think if I knew, I would be absolutely terrified. And I think Jesus was. I mean, we see him in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before. He's actually sweating blood as he's praying to God to take this cup from him. But he still does it. He still walks into this. He still accepts this fate. And he does it because he knows what it means. Yeah? He knows that if he goes through this, if he takes this cup for us, if he takes our place on this cross, that we don't have to suffer the same, that our future will change, that our destiny will be different. Yeah. And I see this for me. There's this crucial verse, and it's only in one of the Gospels. It's in Luke, and it's when they just get Jesus on the cross, just hang him up on the cross, and he says, in Luke 23:34, it says, "Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And I have to, when I think about crucifixion, I said, is this really the fate that was in our future before then? Yeah, is this really what we could be put through? Maybe not in this life, but afterward. And when I hear that, I think, yeah, it must have been because he says they do not know what they are doing. And was Jesus just talking about the people that were there, right, surrounding him, the ones who put him on the cross, the ones who accused him falsely? Was he thinking of the Roman soldiers that were sitting there waiting? Or I think he was talking about everybody who was involved. From the Jews who brought him, who accused him, from the soldiers to was it Pontius Pilate? Yeah, all these people, he's asking for their forgiveness. And there's that key question, they do not know what they do. And this is why this argument that when people say, look, I'm a good person, I don't need Jesus, I don't need God. And I said, this is why I don't think that works. Because how do you know that you are good? How do you know you've never done something like this to somebody else that's caused this kind of hardship for somebody? That maybe you, your family, maybe in your past, in your bloodline, something like this, one of your relatives was involved in Jesus or in somebody else's death in this way. Yeah? How many people at the time thought they were doing the right thing? They really thought Jesus was a false prophet, and they thought they were doing their duty by having him crucified. I mean, I'm sure there were some cynics there at the time who actually thought, maybe we may actually be crucifying an innocent person. But I'm sure most of the people didn't think that, didn't know that. Even the Roman soldiers who were involved in it, they probably had no idea. Yeah, how many people throughout history have done things like this and not knowing it? If you think about the Nazis, how many of them actually thought they were doing the human race a service by their actions? What about the soldiers, the Russian soldiers in Ukraine at the moment? How they see things, yeah? Or in the Middle East, the situation there. Who's right or wrong in that situation? We don't know. How can you know? And the thing is, you don't. Yeah, you can be a good person. You can try your best. But you could be messing up still. Yeah, look at climate change. We've all been releasing too much CO2 and poisons in the atmosphere for the longest time. And we didn't even know it for a while. We know it now, and look, we're still struggle to act, but we didn't even know it before that. So there's all these things that could happen, and we don't know. This brings me back to the cross. What if we were permanently removed from God because we are so not good? By stuff we do intentionally, stuff we do unintentionally, stuff that's somehow passed along and in our family, in our bloodlines, in part of us collective as a society, as humanity. What if we were permanently removed from God? If we were permanently, if we were not cleansed clean of all these things, yeah? It started from the very beginning. What if we were bound to the fate and the suffering and the consequences of us crucifying ourselves? And this is what Jesus did for us on the cross. This is the pain, the suffering, and all he went through to take our place there, yeah? It wasn't just being sacrificed. It was taking all that on himself so that was lifted from us. This is our anchor as Christians, yeah? And this is what Jesus saved us from. This is the hope we have. And the second thing is, Jesus suffered the ultimate suffering, I think, that's available to humans. I don't know if there's anything that could be more painful and cause more suffering than this, than crucifixion. Yeah? And we have a hope in knowing that he himself has experienced it, that he has gone through it, that he's bled through this type of thing just like us. Yeah, that he was there and he feels it, yeah? And this is a question where you always get like, how can God let bad things happen to us people? How could God let people get crucified? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how this happens. Probably has something to do with free will, but I know he's there bleeding with us. Yeah. He's already done it, and he's still doing it today. Yeah. He's there next to us. He's not taking this lightly because he knows what it means. He knows exactly what it means. He knows how it feels. He's bled. He's suffered. He's felt the anguish. And he's there, and he's still pleading for us. He's still interceding. He's still asking for our forgiveness. This is the hope we have, that we have Jesus there. who says, I know what you're going through, and I'm asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for, and I'm praying for you. And this is the hope we as Christians also have, that there's a God there, there's this Jesus there who's, asking for that for us. Yeah. And, and this was Good Friday. This is the Friday, and we know that, it looked dark. Yeah, at the time, if you were a disciple, if you were a relative of him, if you were a follower, it looked dark for you. It was absolutely dark. And we know in retrospect, they didn't know at the time, but we know now that there is redemption around the corner, that although you can suffer the worst, that he suffered the worst, that he suffered all these things, that he's dead, that there is going to be redemption, that he is going to rise again. That Easter Sunday is around the corner. And this is also the hope we have from this, a symbol that this has become. This could be the darkest. You could be in your darkest days. You could be beaten down. You could be, you could be short of breath. You could be all these four things. You could feel shame. You could feel disgraced. But the hope is right there. It's Friday now, but Sunday is just around the corner. And this is also what the cross has now come to symbolize for us, this hope, this belief that we are saved, that we are redeemed, and that we have a hope in this. Yeah.